I never thought I'd be sharing this story publicly, but what happened to me on March 15, 2023, fundamentally changed how I view online dating and personal safety. What started as a disappointing evening turned into the most terrifying night of my life. My name is Sarah, and at the time, I was a 29-year-old marketing coordinator living in Bakersfield, California. I'd moved there about 8 months earlier for work, transferring from my company's San Francisco office. I was still adjusting to the smaller town feel, but I liked my one-bedroom apartment on Oak Street, just 6 blocks from downtown. After my divorce was finalized the previous fall, I'd reluctantly joined the world of online dating. I'd tried 3 different apps, but was having the most luck with one of the more serious relationship-focused platforms. That's where I met Marcus Johnson, or at least, that's the name he was using. We matched in early March, and I'll admit, I was immediately attracted to his profile. He was 32, worked as a mechanical engineer for a renewable energy company, had this great smile in his photos. His profile said he'd moved to Bakersfield about a year ago from Sacramento for work, which I could relate to. He had pictures of himself hiking in the Sierra Nevada, one with a beautiful golden retriever named Max, and several that looked like they were taken at local Bakersfield spots I recognized. Our conversations felt natural and mature. We talked about our careers, bonded over both being transplants to Bakersfield, discussed the best local hiking trails, our favorite coffee shops. He was well-read, had traveled to interesting places, and seemed to have a good sense of humor without being inappropriate. What I found especially appealing was that he didn't rush into suggesting we meet. We texted back and forth for about 10 days before he mentioned getting together. He suggested Cornerstone Cafe on Chester Avenue, which I knew well. I'd gone there several times for work meetings and weekend reading sessions. "How about Thursday evening around 7? He'd texted. "I know Cornerstone closes at 9 on weeknights, so if we hit it off, we could grab dinner somewhere else, or if it's awkward, there's a natural endpoint." I appreciated that he'd thought it through from a safety perspective. Public place, limited time commitment, easy exit strategy. Thursday, March 15th was one of those typical late winter Central Valley days, overcast and cool, with weather reports predicting light rain later. I spent more time than usual getting ready, choosing dark jeans, a soft blue sweater, and comfortable ankle boots. I arrived at Cornerstone right at 7 p.m. The cafe was moderately busy for a Thursday night, with about half the tables occupied. I found a table near the window where I could see Chester Avenue, and ordered a lavender latte. At 7:15, I sent Marcus a text. "Hey, I'm here at a table by the front window. No rush." At 7:25, "Just wanted to make sure you found the right place, Cornerstone Cafe on Chester Avenue near the courthouse." At 7:35, "Everything okay? Let me know if you're running late or need to reschedule." By 7:45, I was starting to feel that familiar sting of embarrassment. The barista, a young woman with purple hair named Emma who I'd chatted with before, kept glancing over sympathetically. At 8 p.m., I called Marcus's number directly. It went straight to voicemail, one of those generic automated messages. I didn't leave a message. By 8:15, I had to accept what was happening. I'd been stood up. Completely ghosted. I'd never had someone just not show up at all with no explanation, no last-minute cancellation, nothing. The cafe was starting to wind down for closing, and I didn't want to sit there looking pathetic. I considered calling an Uber, but it was only 6 blocks to my apartment, and honestly, I needed the walk to clear my head. The light drizzle that had been threatening all evening was just starting, but I had a good rain jacket. I left Cornerstone around 8:30, walking south on Chester Avenue toward downtown. The street was well lit, and there were still people around, other diners leaving restaurants, some folks heading to bars. The rain was just a light mist, making everything look soft under the streetlights. That's when I first became aware of him. About half a block behind me, walking at the same pace, was a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap. In any normal circumstance, this wouldn't have registered. Chester Avenue is a main thoroughfare. Lots of people walk it. But something about his movement caught my attention. He wasn't walking like someone with a destination. He was walking with purpose, but that purpose seemed to be maintaining a specific distance behind me. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was already feeling vulnerable from being stood up, and my mind was probably making connections that weren't there. But as I continued down Chester Avenue, I became increasingly aware of footsteps behind me, steady and consistent, matching my pace exactly. When I reached the intersection with Elm Drive, instead of continuing straight toward my apartment, I decided to test my suspicion. I turned left, taking a longer route home. If this guy was just coincidentally walking in the same direction, he'd continue straight. He turned left too. Now my heart started beating faster. Elm Drive was quieter than Chester Avenue, with more spacing between streetlights and fewer businesses. The rain was getting heavier, and I could hear his footsteps more clearly on the wet pavement. I pulled out my phone and pretended to answer a call, speaking loudly. "Hey Jessica." "Yeah, I'm walking home now. The date was a total bust, guy never showed up. I'm on Elm Drive, should be home in about 10 minutes. The footsteps behind me stopped for a moment. I kept walking, still pretending to be on the phone, and after about 30 seconds I heard them resume. But now he was trying to walk more quietly, staying closer to parked cars. I decided to make another turn to confirm my fears. I turned right onto Pine Road, which would take me further from my apartment but through a neighborhood with some 24-hour businesses. If this was all in my head, he'd continue straight. He turned right onto Pine Road too. Now I was certain. This man was following me, and it wasn't a coincidence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was being stalked by a stranger on a dark, rainy night. I started walking faster, my phone clutched in my hand with 911 ready to dial. The rain was getting heavier, making it harder to hear exactly where he was. But I could still sense his presence, still catch glimpses of movement when I passed under streetlights. That's when my mind started making terrifying connections. During our 2 weeks of texting, Marcus had asked a lot of questions about my daily routine. Where I worked, what time I got off, which coffee shops I liked, what part of town I lived in, whether I had roommates. At the time, it felt like normal getting to know you conversation. But now, with someone following me just blocks from where Marcus was supposed to meet me, those questions felt sinister. He'd specifically mentioned Cornerstone Cafe before I'd ever brought it up. "Oh, I love that place," he'd texted. "Great lavender lattes, and Emma the barista is super nice." I thought it was cool that we frequented the same spot. Now I wondered if he'd been watching me there. He'd asked if I lived alone, and I'd told him yes. He'd asked what part of town, and I'd mentioned downtown near Oak Street. He'd asked about my work schedule. I'd given him a blueprint for finding me. The footsteps behind me were getting closer. I could hear them more clearly despite the rain, and I realized he'd closed the distance between us. I was still 3 blocks from any open business. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of continuing toward the residential area, I turned around and started walking back toward Chester Avenue, toward the lights and businesses that were still open. If this guy was just coincidentally going in the same direction, he'd continue on his path. He didn't. When I turned around, I could see him clearly for the first time under a streetlight about 40 feet behind me. Medium height, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, baseball cap underneath, jeans. White guy, but his face was shadowed. He stopped when he saw me turn, pretended to look at his phone, then turned around too. Now there was no doubt. This man was following me, trying to herd me away from populated areas. I started running. I could hear him behind me, no longer trying to be subtle. His footsteps were definitely closer, definitely faster. The rain was coming down harder, but I could see the glow of Chester Avenue ahead. I've never been so grateful to see a gas station. There was a 24-hour Shell station on the corner with bright security lighting, visible cameras, and customers inside. I ran straight there, bursting through the door soaking wet. The clerk was a middle-aged Latino man named Miguel who took one look at me and immediately asked if I was okay. I explained that someone had been following me, and he locked the front door and called the police without hesitation. I stayed in that gas station for almost 2 hours. The police arrived within 10 minutes, Officers Patricia Williams and David Chin from the Bakersfield Police Department. They took my statement, walked the route I'd taken with flashlights, but my follower was gone. They said without a clear description or direct threats, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols, but they filed a proper report. Officer Williams asked detailed questions about my dating app interactions. She suggested I screenshot any conversations I still had and think carefully about what personal information I might have shared. She mentioned they'd been seeing an increase in cases where people use dating apps to gather information about potential victims. When I got home around 11 p.m., the first thing I did was try to find Marcus on the dating app. His profile was completely gone. Not just unavailable, gone, as if it had never existed. All our conversations had disappeared with it. I spent the rest of the night taking screenshots of the few text messages I still had and going through everything I could remember about our conversations. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious details seemed in retrospect. He'd known specific details about Bakersfield beyond what a casual resident would know. He'd asked strategic questions about my routine and living situation. The next morning, I filed a more detailed report, providing screenshots and Marcus's phone number. They traced it to a prepaid phone purchased with cash that was no longer active. The dating app cooperated, but the profile had been created with fake information and a VPN. I moved to a different apartment complex 2 weeks later. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew where I lived, knew my routine. I installed security cameras, changed my work schedule, stopped going to regular coffee shops. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and paranoia. The worst part wasn't just the fear, it was the violation of trust. I'd been careful about online dating, followed safety rules, met in public places. But someone had used my caution against me, gathering information over weeks to set up what could have been something much worse. 3 months later, I heard about similar cases through my therapist, and saw news stories about women being followed after no-show dates in Fresno and Modesto. I started to wonder if what happened to me was part of something bigger, more organized than just one creepy guy. I still think about that night every time I walk alone after dark. I wonder if the man following me was Marcus, or if Marcus had passed my information to someone else. I wonder how many other women he'd done this to. The dating app added new safety features after my report, but I've never used online dating again. I moved back to San Francisco 6 months later, partly for work but mostly because I never felt safe in Bakersfield after that night. Trust your instincts, always. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't worry about being rude or paranoid. And be really careful about what personal information you share online, even with people who seem trustworthy. How much do you really know about the people you match with on dating apps? Have you ever felt like someone was asking too many questions about your routine? I realize now that predators use these platforms specifically because they give access to potential victims and allow them to gather information gradually without raising suspicion. What I'm about to tell you happened just 2 months after Sarah's incident in Bakersfield, though I didn't know about her story until much later. My name is David, and I'm a 31-year-old software developer who moved to Fresno in January 2023 for a job with a tech startup. What started as what I thought was normal online dating turned into a nightmare that made me question everything I thought I knew about digital privacy and personal safety. I'd been using the same dating app that Sarah had mentioned in her police report, though I didn't learn that connection until Detective Martinez showed me the file months later. I was new to Fresno, didn't know many people outside of work, and figured dating apps were just how you met people in your 30s. I'd had decent luck with online dating in Sacramento, where I'd lived before, a few relationships, nothing serious, but generally positive experiences. That's how I met Jessica Chin. At least, that's what her profile said her name was. She was 28, worked as a graphic designer, had this incredible smile in her photos. Her profile was really well put together, professional photos that weren't overly edited, thoughtful answers to the prompts, listed interests that aligned well with mine, like hiking, craft beer, indie films. She seemed creative, intelligent, and genuinely interesting. We matched on May 18th, and she messaged me first, which I always appreciated. "I see you're into rock climbing. Have you tried any of the spots around Fresno yet?" It was a perfect opener, referencing something specific from my profile and asking about my new city. We started chatting immediately. The conversation flow was incredible. Jessica seemed to have this perfect balance of being interested in my life while sharing interesting details about hers. She asked about my work in software development, and when I mentioned I was working on user interface design, she had intelligent questions about the technical aspects. She shared stories about her graphic design clients, complained about the same freelancer struggles I'd heard from other creative friends. What impressed me most was how well-read she seemed. She could discuss everything from science fiction novels to local Fresno politics to craft brewing techniques. When I mentioned I was reading a somewhat obscure cyberpunk novel, she not only knew it but had read the entire series. She had opinions about local restaurants I'd been wanting to try, suggestions for hiking trails in the Sierra Nevada, and seemed to know all the best coffee shops in downtown Fresno. We texted constantly for about a week before moving to phone calls. Her voice was exactly what I'd expected, warm, intelligent, with this infectious laugh. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in Portland, moving to California for art school, her struggles with freelance work, her close relationship with her sister who lived in San Diego. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, I realize now. The first red flag should have been how quickly she wanted to move our communication off the dating app. After just 3 days of messaging, she suggested we exchange phone numbers, so we can actually have real conversations. When I gave her my number, she immediately started texting instead of using the app, saying she never really checked the app notifications anyway. The second red flag was how much she wanted to know about my daily routine. But it didn't feel intrusive at the time, it felt like genuine interest. She'd ask what time I got to work, what I usually did for lunch, whether I worked late, what my evening routine looked like. When I mentioned I usually went to a specific CrossFit gym after work, she was fascinated by my workout schedule. When I said I grabbed coffee every morning at a place called Grind Coffee Bar on Van Ness Avenue, she said she'd been meaning to try that place. Looking back, I was basically giving her a detailed schedule of my daily movements, but it felt like normal getting-to-know-you conversation. She shared similar details about her routine, her home office setup, her favorite spots to work when she needed a change of scenery, her regular yoga class schedule. After about 10 days of texting and phone calls, I suggested we meet in person. She seemed enthusiastic but said she was dealing with a family situation and needed to travel to San Diego for a few days. "But I'd love to meet as soon as I get back," she said. "This has been the best conversation I've had in years." That's when things started getting weird. While she was supposedly in San Diego, her texting became more intense. She'd send me good morning messages at exactly 7 a.m., which was when I usually woke up. She'd text me around noon asking how my lunch was going. She'd message me at 6:30 p.m. asking if I was heading to the gym. The timing was oddly specific, almost like she knew my schedule better than I'd realized I'd shared. Then she started sending me photos. Not inappropriate ones, but pictures that seemed designed to show she was thinking about me constantly. A coffee cup with, "Wish you were here to share this," at a cafe in San Diego. A sunset from what she said was her sister's balcony with, "Made me think of you." A bookstore photo of the sequel to the novel we'd discussed, with, "Pick this up for you." The photos felt romantic at first, but something about them bothered me. They were almost too perfect, too carefully composed. And some of the details didn't quite add up. The coffee shop she claimed was in San Diego looked familiar, but I couldn't place why. The bookstore photo was taken with professional lighting that seemed odd for a casual phone snap. When she returned from her trip, she wanted to video chat before meeting in person. I thought it was a reasonable safety precaution, so I agreed. We set up a FaceTime call for 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. She looked exactly like her photos, sounded exactly like the person I'd been talking to on the phone. But something felt off about the call. Her responses seemed slightly delayed, and a few times, it looked like she was reading from something off camera. During the video call, she mentioned specific details about my apartment that I'd never shared. She commented on the color of my kitchen cabinets visible in the background, said she liked the artwork on my wall. When I asked how she could see those details, she laughed and said the video quality was really good on her end. But I hadn't moved my laptop, and those things weren't visible from my camera angle. That night, I went through our entire conversation history. I realized that while I'd shared a lot about my routine and preferences, Jessica had been remarkably vague about specific details of her life. She told me she lived downtown, but never mentioned a specific address or neighborhood. She talked about her graphic design work but never mentioned specific clients or projects. She'd discussed her family but never shared their names or specific details about her sister in San Diego. I started to feel like maybe I was being catfished, or at least misled about who she really was. But the video call had confirmed she looked like her photos and sounded like the person I'd been talking to. I decided to suggest we finally meet in person to see if my instincts were right. "How about Saturday afternoon at Grind Coffee Bar?" I suggested, mentioning the coffee shop I told her about. "We could grab coffee and walk around downtown if the weather's nice." Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Perfect. I've been dying to try that place. See you at 2 p.m.? Saturday afternoon, I showed up at Grind Coffee Bar 15 minutes early. I ordered my usual coffee and found a table where I could see the entrance. At exactly 2 p.m., Jessica walked in. She looked exactly like her photos, exactly like she had on our video call. But instead of looking around for me or checking her phone, she walked directly to my table, as if she knew exactly where I'd be sitting. "David," she said, giving me a hug like we'd known each other for years. "You look exactly like I expected." The coffee date itself was pleasant but strange. Jessica seemed to know details about the neighborhood that didn't match with what she told me about being new to these areas. She mentioned changes to the coffee shop's menu that suggested she'd been there before, despite claiming she'd never tried the place. She knew which barista was working, calling him Mike when he brought our drinks, though I'd never seen her interact with him before, and seemed familiar with the cafe's layout. Most unnervingly, she kept mentioning things that I was sure I'd never told her. She asked how my coworker Jason was doing, though I'd never mentioned anyone named Jason from work. She referenced the restaurant I'd been to the previous week, though I was certain I'd never shared that information. When I questioned her about these details, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, you mentioned that in one of our phone calls." But I knew I hadn't. After about an hour of coffee, she suggested we walk around downtown Fresno. As we walked, I noticed she seemed to know exactly where we were going, leading me down streets and pointing out shops and landmarks like a local tour guide. But according to her dating profile and our conversations, she'd only been in Fresno for about 6 months and worked mostly from home. The most disturbing moment came when we walked past my CrossFit gym. I hadn't mentioned we were near my workout spot, but Jessica suddenly said, "Oh, is this the gym you go to? It looks nice. What time do you usually work out here?" When I asked how she knew it was my gym, she claimed I'd pointed it out earlier in our walk. But we'd approached it from a direction that wasn't visible from anywhere we'd been walking, and I definitely hadn't mentioned it. That evening, after walking Jessica back to her car, parked in a spot that had a clear view of the coffee shop's entrance, I noticed. I went home feeling deeply unsettled. I decided to do some investigating. I reverse searched her phone number and found it was registered to a prepaid service, purchased with cash. I looked up her supposed graphic design business and couldn't find any online presence, no portfolio website, no social media business accounts. I searched for Jessica Chin in Fresno and found several, but none that matched the person I'd been talking to. Most disturbing of all, I started going through the photos she'd sent me during our conversations. Using reverse image search, I discovered that several of them had been taken from social media accounts of different people, or were stock photos that had been edited. The San Diego sunset. Photo was actually from a travel blog about Santa Barbara. The coffee shop photo was from a Yelp review of a cafe in Sacramento. I'd been talking to someone who was using a carefully constructed fake identity, someone who seemed to know far more about me and my routine than I'd ever shared, someone who was actively deceiving me about basic facts of her life. Monday morning, I called the Fresno Police Department and spoke with Detective Lisa Martinez. I explained the situation, expecting her to tell me it was just a weird dating experience. Instead, she asked me to come in that afternoon to file a formal report. "We've been seeing an increase in cases like this," Detective Martinez told me when I arrived at the station. "Dating app profiles that seem designed to gather information about targets rather than actually pursue relationships. You're the third person this month who's reported something similar." She showed me files on 2 other cases, including one from Bakersfield that made my blood run cold. A woman named Sarah had been followed after a no-show date with someone using a fake dating profile, someone who had gathered detailed information about her routine through weeks of conversation. "The pattern we're seeing," Detective Martinez explained, "is that these profiles are used to establish trust and gather intelligence. The person behind them learns your schedule, your habits, your regular locations. Sometimes it leads to stalking, sometimes to theft when they know you're not home, sometimes to worse things." I provided Detective Martinez with screenshots of all my conversations with Jessica, her phone number, and details about our meeting. The police technical unit analyzed the photos she'd sent and confirmed that most were stolen from other sources. They traced her phone number to the same prepaid service that had been used in Sarah's case. Most chilling of all, when Detective Martinez checked with my CrossFit gym, they confirmed that a woman matching Jessica's description had been asking questions about members' schedules, claiming she was thinking about joining. The barista at Grind Coffee Bar remembered her coming in several times over the past few weeks, always sitting at tables with clear views of the entrance, always paying attention to customers rather than her phone or laptop. I'd been under surveillance for weeks, possibly months, by someone using a fake identity to learn everything about my life and routine. The person I'd thought was Jessica had been carefully constructing a detailed profile of my daily movements, my workplace, my habits, and my vulnerabilities. I changed my phone number, moved to a different apartment, and switched gyms. I still don't know what the ultimate goal was, whether this was preparation for stalking, robbery, or something worse. But Detective Martinez connected my case to several others across the Central Valley, suggesting this was part of a larger operation using dating apps to target and surveil potential victims. The fake Jessica profile was removed from the dating app, but by then, whoever was behind it had probably moved on to other targets. I deleted all my dating profiles and haven't used online dating since. Here's what scares me most. If I hadn't started questioning the inconsistencies, if I hadn't trusted my instincts that something was wrong, how long would this have continued? How much more information would they have gathered? What was the end game? Have you ever felt like someone you met online knew more about you than they should? Have you noticed inconsistencies in someone's story that didn't quite add up? I used to think the biggest risk of online dating was meeting someone boring or dishonest about their age. Now I understand that dating apps can be used as sophisticated surveillance tools by people with much darker intentions. I need to share something that happened to me in July 2023, something that still makes me question how well we can ever really know another person. My name is Michael, and I'm a 33-year-old accountant living in Modesto, California. What I experienced connects to incidents that have been happening across the Central Valley, and I'm finally ready to talk about it because I think other people need to know how dangerous obsession can become when someone has unlimited access to information about your life. I'd been using dating apps on and off for about a year, having mixed success but generally positive experiences. After my last relationship ended in late 2022, I wasn't in any rush to find someone serious, but I figured it was worth putting myself out there. I matched with a woman named Amanda Rodriguez in mid-June 2023 on the same app that had been involved in those other incidents in Bakersfield and Fresno, though I didn't know about that connection at the time. Amanda's profile seemed refreshingly honest compared to some I'd seen. She was 29, worked as a dental hygienist, had photos that looked natural and unfiltered. Her bio mentioned loving hiking, cooking, and true crime podcasts. She seemed like someone who had her life together, stable job, clear interests, looking for something genuine rather than just casual dating. Our initial conversations went well. She was intelligent, asked thoughtful questions about my work in forensic accounting, shared funny stories about her patients at the dental office. We talked about local hiking trails around Modesto, restaurant recommendations, weekend plans. After about a week of messaging, I suggested we meet for coffee at a place called Being Seen on McHenry Avenue, right downtown where there'd be plenty of people around. The date itself was fine. Not terrible, not amazing, just fine. Amanda was exactly who she'd presented herself to be online, attractive, articulate, interesting to talk with. But there wasn't that spark, that natural chemistry you hope for on a first date. The conversation felt a little forced at times, like we were both trying harder than things should have to be. She seemed nervous, frequently checking her phone, and kept steering the conversation back to my personal life in ways that felt slightly intense for a first meeting. She asked very detailed questions about my living situation, whether I had roommates, what part of town I lived in, whether I felt safe in my neighborhood. When I mentioned I lived alone in a duplex on Elm Avenue, she wanted to know if I knew my neighbors well, whether the area was quiet at night, if I had good security. At the time, I figured she was just being safety conscious as a single woman thinking about future dates. She also seemed very interested in my work schedule and daily routine. She asked what time I usually got to the office, whether I worked late often, what I did for lunch, how I spent my evenings. Again, it felt like normal getting to know you conversation, but the level of detail she wanted was more than I'd experienced on most first dates. After about an hour and a half, I could tell we weren't clicking romantically. She was a nice person, but sometimes that's just how it goes. When I suggested we wrap up, she seemed disappointed but agreed. I walked her to her car, a silver Honda Civic, and we did that awkward end-of-date hug where both people know there probably won't be a second date. I had a really nice time, I said, trying to be polite. Thanks for meeting me. Me too, she replied. I hope we can do this again soon. I gave a non-committal response about being in touch, which I thought was a clear signal that I wasn't planning to pursue anything further. Most people would have picked up on that cue and moved on. Amanda didn't. She texted me that night. Had such a great time today. When can we see each other again? I waited until the next day to respond, trying to be kind but clear. Thanks for coffee yesterday. You seem like a really nice person, but I didn't feel the romantic connection I'm looking for. I hope you understand. Her response came immediately. Oh, I think you just need time to think about it. Sometimes attraction grows. Let's try again this weekend. I didn't respond to that message, hoping she'd take the hint. Instead, she sent 3 more texts over the next 2 days, each one more insistent that we should give things another chance. I finally sent a more direct message. Amanda, I appreciate your interest, but I don't think we're compatible. I wish you the best. That's when things started getting weird. 2 days later, she showed up at Being Seen, the coffee shop where we'd had our date, at exactly the same time I'd arrived for our original meeting. When I walked in for my usual weekend coffee, she was sitting at the same table we'd shared, waving at me like we had plans. Michael! What a coincidence, she said brightly. I was just thinking about you. It definitely wasn't a coincidence. Being Seen wasn't in her neighborhood, and the timing was too perfect. I politely said hello, got my coffee to go, and left quickly. She followed me outside, insisting we should sit and talk, that she had something important to tell me about our last conversation. I've been thinking about what you said, she explained, and I realized I was nervous on our date. I didn't show you the real me. I think if you gave me another chance, you'd see we're actually perfect for each other. I firmly but politely declined and walked to my car. As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot watching me leave. Over the next week, the texts and calls escalated. She'd message me good morning every day at 7 a.m., which was exactly when I usually woke up. She'd text around noon asking how my lunch was going. She'd call in the evenings, leaving voicemails about how she'd been thinking about me all day and knew we were meant to be together. I stopped responding entirely, hoping she'd lose interest. Instead, she started showing up places. I'd go to my regular grocery store on Saturday mornings, and she'd be in the produce section, acting surprised to see me. I'd stop by the gym after work, and she'd be on a treadmill near the entrance, watching for me to arrive. I'd grab lunch at a sandwich shop near my office, and she'd be at a nearby table, claiming she was meeting a friend who was running late. Each time, she'd approach me with this bright, cheerful demeanor, as if we were old friends catching up rather than a woman who was clearly following me around. She'd ask about my day, mention things she thought I'd be interested in, suggest we grab coffee or dinner soon. When I'd remind her that I wasn't interested in pursuing anything, she'd act hurt and confused, like I was being unreasonable. The most disturbing incident happened on a Thursday evening in late July. I'd been working late at the office, finishing up a quarterly audit for a client. It was about 8:30 p.m. when I finally left, and the building was mostly empty. As I walked to my car in the parking garage, I noticed Amanda sitting in her silver Civic 3 spaces away from mine. When she saw me, she got out of her car and approached with that same bright smile. "Michael, I was hoping I'd run into you. I brought you something." She handed me a manila envelope, thick with papers. "I've been writing down all the things I've been thinking about since our date," she said. "I wanted you to understand how much you mean to me." I didn't want to take the envelope, but she was standing very close, and I was alone in a mostly empty parking garage with someone who was clearly unstable. I took it, said I needed to get home, and quickly got in my car. She stood there watching as I drove away. When I got home, I made the mistake of opening the envelope. Inside were about 30 pages of handwritten notes, all about me. Detailed observations about my daily routine, my habits, my preferences. She documented what time I arrived at work each day, what I ordered for lunch, what routes I took driving around town. She noted what I wore on different days, what groceries I bought, what time I went to the gym. But it wasn't just surveillance notes. She'd written long passages about what she imagined our future together would look like. She'd planned out dates she wanted to take me on, described the house she thought we should buy together, even picked out names for children she imagined we'd have. She'd written detailed analyses of our one coffee date, explaining away every moment when I'd seemed disinterested as evidence that I was just shy or overwhelmed by my feelings for her. The most chilling part was a section titled, "Michael's Needs," where she'd listed things she thought were missing from my life based on her observations. She'd decided I was lonely because I lived alone, that I was unhealthy because I often grabbed fast food for lunch, that I was stressed because I worked long hours. She'd written out plans for how she could fix all these problems once we were together. She'd been watching me for weeks, taking notes on everything I did, creating this elaborate fantasy relationship in her head based on one mediocre coffee date where I'd clearly expressed no romantic interest. I took the notebook straight to the Modesto Police Department the next morning. Officer Jennifer Walsh took my report and immediately seemed concerned when I mentioned the dating app and the level of detailed surveillance. "We've been seeing a pattern of this across the Central Valley," Officer Walsh told me. "People using dating apps to gather information and then engaging in escalating stalking behavior. Can you think of anything specific you told her during your conversations that might have helped her track your routine?" Looking back through our text messages, I realized I'd given her a roadmap to my entire life. I'd mentioned my office building when explaining my work, named specific restaurants and coffee shops I liked, told her about my gym and grocery store preferences. I'd even mentioned that I usually work late on Thursdays because that's when I finished weekly reports. Amanda had taken every casual detail I'd shared and used it to build a surveillance operation. She knew where I'd be and when, based on information I'd volunteered during what I thought was normal getting-to-know-you conversation. The police traced Amanda's real information through the dating app and discovered she'd been reported for similar behavior before. A man in Sacramento had filed a restraining order against her 6 months earlier for stalking and harassment after a single date. Another man in Stockton had reported her for showing up at his workplace repeatedly after he'd declined a second date. Officer Walsh connected my case to the ongoing investigation into the Central Valley dating app incidents. Apparently, there had been multiple reports of people using these platforms to gather information for stalking, surveillance, and worse. Some appeared to be coordinated efforts involving fake profiles, while others, like Amanda's case, seemed to be individual obsessions that escalated into dangerous behavior. I was granted a temporary restraining order, and Amanda was arrested for stalking and harassment. During the search of her apartment, police found additional notebooks documenting not just me, but 3 other men she'd met through dating apps. She'd been conducting simultaneous surveillance operations on multiple targets, taking detailed notes on their routines, and developing elaborate fantasy relationships with people who'd clearly rejected her. The most disturbing discovery was that she'd been communicating with others online about stalking techniques and surveillance methods. She was part of forums where people shared tips about following targets without being detected, gathering information from social media, and dealing with rejection from people they were obsessed with. Amanda pleaded guilty to multiple counts of stalking and was sentenced to 18 months in jail, plus 3 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. The restraining order was made permanent, and she's required to stay away from dating apps as a condition of her probation. But here's what really keeps me up at night. Amanda wasn't part of the larger criminal operation that had been targeting people across the Central Valley. She was just an individual who'd become obsessed after one bad date, and had access to unlimited information about my life through social media, public records, and the details I'd innocently shared during our conversations. If someone unstable decides to fixate on you, they can learn everything about your routine, your habits, your vulnerabilities, just from publicly available information and whatever you share thinking you're making normal conversation. They can turn your own openness and trust against you. I've since moved to a different apartment, changed my routines, and become much more careful about what personal information I share online or during early dating conversations. I still check over my shoulder more than I'd like to admit, and I've had to block several fake social media accounts that I suspect were Amanda trying to continue monitoring me. The experience taught me that stalking doesn't require sophisticated criminal networks or fake identities. Sometimes it just takes one person who refuses to accept rejection and who has access to the incredible amount of personal information we all share without thinking about it. Detective Martinez from Fresno later told me that my case helped them understand that the Central Valley incidents weren't all connected to one organized group. Some were sophisticated criminal operations using fake profiles to target victims, while others were individual stalkers like Amanda who were using the same digital tools to feed their obsessions. Have you ever had someone seem too interested in the details of your daily routine during early conversations? Have you noticed the same person showing up in multiple places where you regularly go? I used to think stalking was something that happened to celebrities or people in abusive relationships. Now I understand that anyone can become a target, and that our digital lives make it easier than ever for someone to learn everything about us and use that information to invade our privacy and safety. What I'm about to tell you will change how you think about online dating forever. My name is Jennifer, and until September 2023, I worked for a company that you've probably never heard of, but that was making millions of dollars by exploiting people's loneliness and desire for genuine connection. What I discovered during my 3 months there connects all the incidents that had been happening across the Central Valley, and explains how sophisticated these operations really are. I was 26 years old, living in Sacramento, and desperately needed a job. I'd graduated with a communications degree 2 years earlier, but had been struggling to find steady work that paid enough to cover my student loans and rent. When I saw a posting for customer engagement specialist at a company called Digital Connection Services, the pay was too good to ignore. $22 an hour plus bonuses, full-time, work from home. The job description was vague but mentioned client communication, relationship management, and customer retention. During my phone interview, the manager, Stephen Richards, explained that they help people make meaningful connections through various online platforms. It sounded like legitimate customer service work, maybe for a social media company or networking site. I should have known something was wrong when they hired me immediately after a 15-minute interview. No background check, no references required. Stephen just asked if I was comfortable with technology, good at written communication, and available to work evening and weekend hours. When I said yes to all three, he told me I could start the following Monday. My first day, I received a laptop, a company phone, and access to what Stephen called client management software. I was told I'd be working with a team of 12 other engagement specialists, all women between the ages of 23 and 30. We'd be connecting with clients through various dating platforms to help them have better experiences and find meaningful relationships. The reality was much darker than that sanitized description. Digital Connection Services was running what they called relationship facilitation across multiple dating apps. But what they were actually doing was employing women to create fake profiles and engage in long-term deceptive conversations with men looking for genuine relationships. The company had contracts with over 40 dating apps, pretending to provide enhanced user engagement services, while actually operating sophisticated romance scams. My job was to manage between 15 and 20 fake profiles simultaneously across different platforms. Each profile had a detailed backstory, complete fictional identity, career, family background, interests, and relationship history. I was given scripts for initial conversations, guidelines for gathering personal information, and quotas for how long I needed to keep each relationship active. The profiles I managed weren't random. They were carefully crafted based on psychological research about what types of women attracted different demographic groups. Sarah Martinez was designed to appeal to divorced men in their 30s. She was a single mom, worked as a nurse, loved hiking and cooking. Ashley Thompson targeted younger professionals. She was a marketing coordinator, traveled frequently, enjoyed craft beer and live music. Rebecca Williams was for older men looking for serious relationships. She was a widow, worked as a teacher, wanted to settle down and start a family. Each profile had professional photos that had been purchased from modeling agencies or stolen from social media accounts of women who had no idea their images were being used. The company had databases of hundreds of photos for each fictional identity, including casual selfies, vacation pictures, workplace photos, and images with friends and family members who were actually paid models. The sophistication of the operation was stunning. We had access to public records databases, social media monitoring tools, and background check services. When a man matched with one of my profiles, I could research everything about his life within minutes: his job, his address, his family members, his financial situation, his social media activity, his dating history if he'd used the platform before. My training lasted 2 weeks and covered psychological manipulation techniques that the company euphemistically called engagement strategies. I learned how to create emotional dependency by being intermittently responsive, sometimes replying immediately, sometimes waiting hours to make the target worry. I was taught to mirror men's interests and values, to share personal stories that would create feelings of intimacy and trust. Most importantly, I was trained to gather specific types of information under the guise of normal conversation. I needed to learn about their work schedules, their living situations, their financial status, their family relationships, their insecurities and vulnerabilities. All of this information was documented in detailed client files that were accessible to the entire company. The men I was talking to had no idea they were paying premium subscription fees to dating apps that were using their money to fund elaborate deception operations. They thought they were having genuine conversations with real women who were interested in them romantically. In reality, they were providing personal information to a company that was building comprehensive profiles for purposes I didn't fully understand at first. Stephen Richards explained that we were helping people practice their conversation skills and build confidence before meeting real women. He claimed that many of our clients eventually found genuine relationships because their experiences with us had made them better communicators. It was a lie that made the job feel less horrible, but it was completely untrue. The quota system revealed the real purpose. I was required to keep each conversation active for a minimum of 3 weeks, with a goal of 6 to 8 weeks. I needed to escalate emotional investment gradually, moving from casual interest to deep personal sharing to discussions of meeting in person. I was supposed to schedule real-world meetings but always cancel at the last minute with compelling excuses that would generate sympathy rather than anger. The men who had been talking to my fake profiles for weeks or months would become increasingly emotionally invested. They'd share details about their jobs, their families, their fears, their hopes for the future. They'd send photos of their daily lives, their homes, their pets, their friends. They'd open up about previous relationships, their financial struggles, their health problems, their biggest insecurities. I was documenting all of this in their client files, along with their schedules, their routines, their regular locations, and their vulnerabilities. Information that could be used for identity theft, stalking, burglary, or worse. About 6 weeks into the job, I started noticing patterns that made me deeply uncomfortable. Some of the men I was talking to mentioned strange incidents, being followed, having their personal information show up in unexpected places, people appearing at their regular locations who seemed to know details about their lives. One man, who I was talking to as Sarah Martinez, told me he'd been having problems with a woman from a dating app who'd become obsessed with him after one date. He described her showing up at his workplace, his gym, his regular coffee shop. He mentioned filing a police report and getting a restraining order. As he told me about this terrifying experience, I was required to express sympathy while continuing to gather information about his responses to the stalking, his security measures, and his emotional state. Another man, talking to my Ashley Thompson profile, described an incident where he'd been followed after a date that turned out to be a no-show. He'd been genuinely traumatized by the experience, was considering therapy, and had stopped using dating apps entirely except for our conversations. He told Ashley that talking to her was the only thing that made him feel like he could trust online dating again. I was talking to victims of the very operation I was working for, and I was being paid to continue exploiting them. The breaking point came when I recognized one of the names in my client files. Michael Patterson, from Modesto, had been talking to my Rebecca Williams profile for about a month. He was sweet, funny, clearly looking for something serious after a bad experience with dating app stalking. During one of our conversations, he mentioned that a woman named Amanda had stalked him after a single coffee date, that she'd taken detailed notes about his routine and shown up everywhere he went. I looked up his file in our system and discovered that Amanda Rodriguez was actually another employee at Digital Connection Services. Her real name was Amanda Foster, and she'd been working for the company for 8 months before being arrested for stalking. The company had fired her not because of her criminal behavior, but because her arrest had attracted police attention to dating app-related incidents in the Central Valley. That's when I realized that some of the stalking cases weren't just individual obsessions. They were employees of my company who had become personally fixated on their targets. The company was creating conditions where emotionally unstable women were given detailed information about vulnerable men, encouraged to develop fake intimate relationships with them, and provided with all the tools necessary for stalking and harassment. I started digging deeper into the company's operations and discovered that Digital Connection Services was just one branch of a larger organization. They had contracts with dating apps, social media platforms, and customer service companies across the country. They were operating call centers in multiple states, employing hundreds of women to conduct these deceptive conversations. The information they gathered wasn't just for keeping men engaged on dating platforms. It was being sold to marketing companies, background check services, and what Stephen euphemistically called security consultants. They were essentially running a massive identity theft and personal surveillance operation disguised as customer engagement services. Some of the men's information was being used for financial fraud. Their employment details and spending habits helped criminals apply for credit cards and loans in their names. Their personal schedules and security routines were being sold to burglary rings. Their emotional vulnerabilities and family information were being used by scammers targeting elderly relatives. The most disturbing discovery was that some clients were being specifically targeted for what the company called field testing. Men who seemed particularly lonely, financially secure, and emotionally vulnerable were flagged for in-person contact. The company would send attractive women, sometimes employees, sometimes freelance contractors, to accidentally meet these men in their regular locations and attempt to develop real-world relationships for the purpose of financial exploitation. I'd been participating in an operation that was systematically destroying people's ability to trust, stealing their personal information, and setting them up for everything from identity theft to stalking to elaborate in-person romance scams. I quit immediately and went straight to the FBI. Agent Sandrichin from the Sacramento field office had been investigating similar operations across multiple states. My information helped them understand how sophisticated these schemes had become, and how they were connected to the incidents that had been reported across the Central Valley. The investigation revealed that Digital Connection Services was part of a network of companies operating what the FBI called romance scam farms, organized operations employing hundreds of people to conduct long-term deceptive relationships with victims on dating platforms. These weren't individual scammers working alone. They were well-funded businesses with management structures, training programs, and technological infrastructure. Digital Connection Services was shut down in November 2023, and Stephen Richards was arrested along with 6 other managers. The operation had victimized over 3,000 men across California, Nevada, and Arizona, stealing more than $2.8 million through various fraud schemes and selling personal information that led to additional crimes including identity theft, stalking, and burglary. But here's what really terrifies me. This was just one company. Agent Chen told me they've identified similar operations across the country, and that the dating app industry has been slow to implement security measures that would prevent these kinds of scams because the fake profiles actually increase user engagement and subscription revenue. The men who matched with my fake profiles thought they were developing genuine connections with real women. Instead, they were providing detailed personal information to criminals who used their loneliness and desire for companionship against them. Every photo they shared, every detail about their routine, every vulnerable moment they opened up about was being documented and potentially sold to people who meant them harm. I think about the men I talk to every day. They trusted Sarah, and Ashley, and Rebecca, with their hopes, their fears, their most personal information. They had no way of knowing that the woman they thought they were falling for was actually a 26-year-old college graduate being paid to exploit their emotions and gather intelligence about their lives. The dating apps where this was happening have implemented some new security measures, but Agent Chen warned me that these operations adapt quickly and are constantly finding new ways to exploit people's desire for connection. Before you share personal information with someone you've met online, ask yourself, how much could someone do with the details you're providing about your routine, your job, your living situation, your vulnerabilities? Because somewhere out there, people like my former colleagues are being paid to gather exactly that information and use it against you. How well do you really know the person you're talking to on that dating app? Could you tell if their photos were stolen, their story was scripted, their interest in you was just a job they were being paid to do? Because the people behind these operations are much more sophisticated and organized than most people realize, and they're specifically targeting the loneliness and trust that makes us human. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.